So welcome everybody. We have got a few key issues that I want to deal with today because the reality is we haven't got much time. What you need to understand though is if I have covered something that you don't understand or want to ask a quick question on, feel free to contact me. Just say that you were on this website or whatever we're doing, podcast. I won't charge you for it, but just tell us that you were here, okay? The starting point is types of employment. We're going to tell you why you need to know the difference. I'm going to look at trial periods. Most employers don't really understand trial periods, and you're stupid if you don't, because they're without doubt one of the best things that employers have ever been given by the government. Why have employment agreements? And I'm going to throw in some suggested clauses. Okay, I'm going to do it quickly because, like I said, I just want to cover a bit of space. The starting point that you need to have if you're an employer is this. When I get somebody on, what sort of employee are they? Are they permanent? That includes part-time or full-time. Are they casual? Are they fixed term, or are they a contractor? Do not assume that because you say somebody is a casual employee, they are in fact a casual employee. Do not assume because you think it would be really good to have a contractor that in fact they are truly a contractor. It doesn't matter what you call them in your agreement. If you get it wrong, the law will look behind that, okay? So the starting point is, if they're a permanent employee, this just means you've got an ongoing employment relationship, okay? They come in regularly, either full-time or part-time. They get sick leave, they get annual leave, and importantly, they cannot be dismissed or terminated unless you've got due process and unless warnings are given with due process. So your standard matter will be, let's imagine we've got somebody on our farm and they just come in year round. You're on a sheep farm, you just got somebody that comes in year round. They're there right through the year. They are a permanent full-time employment, okay? So what you've got to distinguish that from is, say you get somebody in for tailing. I don't know, I'm a sheep farmer with 12. I'm a horse farmer, so please, I don't actually know how to run a proper big farm. But I'm imagining that what you do is you could bring in, say, somebody to tail. They might be contractors, and I know that there can be contractors that come in, or you might get somebody in and they might come in for a couple of weeks. That might be a casual employee, okay? So the thing is to understand the difference. A fixed term employment agreement means you get somebody in for a specified period of time. That means that their employment ends automatically at a specific date. And a genuine reason for this can be, although I don't know whether you guys would have much of that, maternity leave is a really good example of where you might have somebody on a fixed term employment agreement. So somebody's going off on maternity leave, or somebody's going off for a set period of time, and you employ somebody to fill that spot or position, okay? So that's an example of where their employment finishes at the end of that term. Now, in the old days, the dairy farmers always used to have all their employers on year-long fixed-term agreements, and the idea was they rolled them over. That was wrong. You cannot do it. You cannot just have fixed-term agreements on the basis that we'll have you for a year, and if we don't like you, we'll get rid of you. If you're still operating under that misapprehension, stop it. You'll get yourself into trouble. You'll get yourself into trouble because if they're not fixed term and you fire them at the end of that term, you'll have all sorts of concerns about unjustified dismissal. Okay. Casual employees, separate standalone engagement, no guaranteed hours of work. They're not on a roster. There's no regular pattern of work. There's no expectation of continuing employment. That's important because casual employees are often the ones that you employ and pay holiday pay as you go. Now, I want to explain why it's really important that you don't get this wrong. I have had employers that have employed somebody on a casual employment agreement for years. And what they've done is they've said, oh, it's casual, and we will just pay you 8% as you go. They never give them holidays, etc. They don't give them sick leave. If that person goes after a year or 2 years or 3 years, or God forbid 5 years, I've had it happen, when they leave, they are entitled to be paid, I think it's 8% of everything they have earned over those years. The law says they were entitled, if they weren't a true casual, even though you paid them the 8%, they are entitled to be paid holiday pay. That is your classic reason why it is really important to make sure if you're employing somebody as a casual employee, they are in fact a casual employee. So I'm just really trying to put the fear of goodness into you, because that's an important reason why it matters. Independent contractors, they aren't employees. So your sharers would be a classic example of independent contractors. They just come in, they're running their own business. There's a contract service agreement. They're in business for themselves. They pay their own tax, ACC levies, okay? Again, though, if you employ somebody as an independent contractor and they're not, you get into trouble. Let's use an example. I've seen people say, well, I get somebody in to do our tractor work, and they come in all year round and do X number of hours per week, and we supply the tractor, and we call them an independent contractor, and we don't pay them sick leave, and we don't pay them annual leave. You've got to be really careful, because if the court said no, they were an employee, not an independent contractor, you have the same thing that happens with a casual employment agreement. They may leave, or you may dismiss them thinking you can, because they're an employee, you just have to tell them to go. And if the court finds that they're an independent contractor, you can end up with having to pay money out that you never expected to. Now, the only reason I have given you this very short rundown is that if you employ somebody, you need to go to your advisor. Don't go to your accountant. The accountants are not lawyers. I'm sorry, but you wouldn't go to me to ask how to pay your taxes. If you're going to find out about employment law, go to somebody that knows and just check that you've got your right agreements. A lot of you maybe use federated farmers agreements, etc. Good. Just make sure you've got the person under the right agreement. Okay. And I'm sorry, I know I'm doing this quickly, but it needs to be said. All of you need to know about the 90-day trial period. Employers can employ someone on a 90-day trial period. You will mostly all fit under this. If you've got 19 or less employees, if you haven't employed them before, and this is the really most important thing, you must have a written employment agreement, which includes the 90-day trial period before they start employment. If they get their employment agreement and sign it 1 hour after they start work, you cannot use the 90-day trial period. Now, it is absolutely vital that people understand this. Again, I'm saying this. If they work at all for you before they sign the employment agreement with the 90-day trial period in, you cannot rely upon that trial period. Now, what I've said is there's certain things, the trial period and those standard clauses that you'll have, they can't be longer than 90 days. You've still got to give notice. That can be flipped over. You don't need to give reasons for their employment being terminated. But if somebody asks you, employment law, case law would strongly suggest you tell them. And employment law, case law would also say, as a matter of fairness, you should let people know how they're going during the trial. And that's just a matter of decency as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you get somebody that's clearly not working out and you think, oh, I'm not going to keep them through the 90-day trial, I would, just as a matter of management, say to them when it becomes obvious, like it might become obvious in the first day, you need to understand that you are doing this and this and this and this. I mean, here goes a classic example. It is very important to close gates when you work on a farm. You're not closing gates. You need to understand that if you don't start closing gates, it's very likely that your 90-day trial period is going to end in the result in the end of your employment. Okay, so do that. So the reason you should have a 90-day trial period is that if you dismiss them under the 90-day trial period, they cannot bring a claim for unjustified dismissal. So they cannot bring a claim for unjustified dismissal and lost wages. However, you need to understand that they can still bring a personal grievance claim for something like unjustified disadvantage, and I'll explain it. Let's say Jennifer here is employed on a trial period of 90 days. And during that trial period, I am nasty to her, I bully her, I say that, just imagine you're a lesbian, I say, look, honestly, I don't like lesbians, I don't want you in my business, you know, all these sort of things. Whilst she cannot, when she gets dismissed by me, bring an unjustified dismissal claim, oh my goodness, she's got an unjustified disadvantage, okay? Because she can say, during that period, you did this, you harassed me, you bullied me, etc. Okay? So just be aware the 90-day trial period does not remove all risk. It just allows you to dismiss somebody in a far easier and with far less rigmarole than you would if they were a permanent employee. Okay, Jennifer, how am I going for time? Not too bad? Okay, right. What I also want to talk about now is employment agreements. Again, this is not meant to frighten people, but this is why people need to realise if you're an employer, you must provide an employee with a written employment agreement. Now, people say to me all the time, I've never had a written employment agreement and I've employed this person for 5 years and I've given the employment agreement to them and they refuse to sign it. That's fine, okay? You can't force people to sign an employment agreement, but if you've provided them with a written employment agreement, then at least you can't be fined if it all goes to hell in a handcart, right? So you must provide employees. However, you would be, and there's a lot of employers that do this, you would be fiscally irresponsible because of what can happen and if it all goes wrong, not to provide every employee with a written employment agreement. And frankly, I would not start the employment until I got a signed agreement back. I think that if somebody refuses to sign a written employment agreement, that is a very good sign to you as an employer that you should not be employing them, okay? So, employment agreements, why have them? You're required at law. The other thing I'm going to say, please don't think you're all saving money by making them up yourself. I see people do this and it sort of annoys me because some people are running businesses that are, if not multi-million, have really require all their savings, all their capital, all their hard work, they're running a business. And for the sake of what can be a few $100s, they do their own employment agreements, which can be catastrophic if they haven't done them properly, okay? So if I was going to say, is it worth spending money on an employment agreement? I would say absolutely. I put in here what an employment must include, just to show you that it talks about names. Do you see the nature of the employment, i.e. fixed term, permanent, casual, job description, agreed hours of work or an arrangement relating to the times the employee is to work. It's got to have the wages, and it's got to have a whole lot of other things in there. I'm not going to go through them. Any good employment agreement that you use will have this included in it. Now, there are other things that we say you should also include if you're looking at an agreement. Notice periods. For example, if somebody's going to leave you, how much notice do they need to give you? Now, some people will be happy with a week's notice. Some of you will say, well, if somebody's going to leave, I need a month's notice because I really can't run my business without this employee, and it's going to take me a month by the time I've, gone out to the market, tried to replace them. So think really long and hard about how much notice you need. Redundancy, you'll see. If you're going to make somebody redundant, how much notice do they get once the decision's been made? Performance reviews are good to have in agreements, but only if you do them. If you're hopeless and would not do a yearly performance review, don't put them in them. I hate performance reviews because I really do them every day. My staff tell me I'm terrible. Like if I don't, I will tell people as I go along in the job if it's going well or not. So I could probably not do performance reviews because people pretty good idea of how they're going. But performance reviews are sometimes tied in with, of course, remuneration reviews. So just if you want to keep people, then especially the young ones, they need to know how they're going. If you're not a good talker, then put performance reviews in which require you to sit with them and tell them how they're going, how they can do better, and if they're ever going to get a pay increase and what you need them to do to get a pay increase. I've put in there, which may or may not be helpful. I don't know whether people, because this is on the system, if people want this, what I've given, this is helpful, but I've put out the minimum rest breaks. Now, on a farm, I don't know how people do their farms. I remember when we were on a stud farm, it was pretty easy because the men used to come in for lunch at home every, they came and there was that lunch hour break. And then it was pretty clear when the men went in for a cup of tea, but that's because we were on a farm and we had our home there, do you know what I mean? So you had your breaks. But people need to be wary that there are minimum rest breaks provided for in legislation, and you need to make sure that you follow those, okay? And it's not rocket science, it can't be that difficult. Other things you need to have in your employment agreement. You need to know, we've missed an ability to suspend. Have I got that? Where are? Oh no, over. Ability to suspend. You need to have that in your employment agreement, okay? If you don't have an employment agreement that allows you to suspend people, you can't suspend them. You can have other little things in there that are really good, like if somebody, this is what happens a lot on farms. Let's say somebody you think has been growing, no, it doesn't happen a lot in farms, but let's say you think there's a meth lab in one of your employees' houses, and the cops show up and they raid them and they find methamphetamine. Remembering that that employee is still your employee, and to do an investigation, if they don't plead guilty, you have to do this whole investigation, and they may say, I'm not saying anything to you because I've got a right not to self-incriminate myself. And you're sitting there and going, oh my goodness, does this mean that I have got to wait a year before this person pleads guilty or is convicted by the police until I can investigate? What you do is you put something in your contract that simply says you can suspend people without pay if there's a police investigation going on. I really think people should put that in, okay, because otherwise it can get really, really messy. The ability to deduct money. Tell me when I'm over my time. I'm
probably close to.
Probably close. Okay. what I'll do is, I don't want to use up other people's time, but what you'll see is I've got here, and if people want it, I can provide it, some of the recent changes. So if people have got old employment agreements that they're using all the time and just got them on Word, be aware, domestic violence leave has changed. Sick leave's changing. You've got bereavement leave changes, parental leave, okay? So again, I know that people will work off Word versions and just keep updating them. Make sure that the contract you're using is up to date. And then I'm just going, don't draft them off the internet yourself. Don't use one you've been using for years. And the other thing is, I haven't got into dismissal, but for goodness sake, whatever you should do, seek advice before you do something stupid or before you decide to dismiss somebody, not after. The only people that make money, if you come to them, if you don't seek advice, is lawyers. Lawyers should keep you out of trouble. That's what we want our clients to do. If you come to us afterwards, it can get very expensive. So hopefully that's within time. I'll talk to the moderator.
That is perfect. You're within times, don't worry. We have had a question come through though.
Yep.
So Robert Young is asking, so he has an employee on a pay as you go for holidays. The hours variable.
Yep. Casual employment.
Yep, casual, yeah. So he's wondering, how does he work holidays? How does he pull that in? Does he add the 8% holiday pay into his pay, or? The
difficulty is, if he's a true casual, he doesn't get holidays. So Mr. Young, what? The whole point of being a casual is that you're not entitled to paid holidays, and that's why you get your 8% as you go. The problem is, if you've got somebody on an employment agreement and paying them as they go, but they are in fact permanent, that's when you have to pay them at the end a whole lot of holidays. So what Robert should do, if you want, and it won't cost you anything, you need to ring me after this, okay? And me or Jennifer or one of my team will let you know whether you should be worried or whether you shouldn't be worried. If you should be worried, then I'm sure you've got your own advisors to go to, okay? But if you want to, give me a ring and we can let you know whether you need to sort things out or not. Sorry, Robert, but I just don't know enough about it to be able to give you the right advice over Zoom.
That's great. Thanks, Mary Jane. And keep those questions coming in. There's been another one. How can we incentivise staff to through bonuses, or what's some other ways to incentivize staff to stay and to keep working for us?
My advice, and this is only from being an employer myself, so I put both caps on. The best employers, and what people tell us and why people go, is people think it's money, and people think that incentivizes. I think that the current employers need to look outside that. I think bonuses are a really good idea, but you make it so that it's completely discretionary. Do you know what I mean? So you tell people what you're looking for, and if they meet that, then you give them a bonus at the end of, and I don't even think a year. I've got the young one here because it's quite helpful. I think even 6 monthly. That's what I would do. Do you know what I mean? So if you're really trying to keep people, I would have but you need to be honest with them what you're looking for, and you also need to be looking at going outside the square. Sometimes people, and I spoke to my young ones the other week, do you want more money or more holidays? A lot of them are young and they said more money. Yeah. But other people might be at a different part of their lives, do you know what I mean? And they say, well, actually, I'd like more holidays. So I think what we have to learn to be flexible working arrangements. I've got another one at work, so I'm just using my examples, do you know what I mean? That's now going to work different hours that works in with my business. So I think you've just got to be really flexible to good employees, but don't treat bad ones the same as the good ones, because I think what gets people bitter and twisted, well, I was a bit of an A-type personality. Do you mean if you treat everybody the same? So I think people, if they're going to be incentivized, there's a whole lot of ways of doing it.
Cool, thank you. We've got another question here. We've got time for a couple more as well. If the employee goes on maternity leave, what happens to the staff house? Because obviously if they go on maternity leave, they have the staff house, maybe they only have one house on the farm. So how do they get in a replacement employee when they're living in a house? Do you have that? Do you know the answer?
No, but I will tell you by the end of it. My natural reaction is, and this is one of the really real troubles about, sorry, this is one of the things that
we do have a clause in our employment agreement about that.
Yeah, can you go and get that, please? I think we've got a clause in our employment agreement that actually says if you're on maternity leave, you leave the house. But I better check, okay, because that's a real issue. I agree, because the problem is you got one house, they're on maternity leave, and it could be a real reason for not employing a woman as well. Do you know what I mean, Megan? I'm not being negative, but do you know what I mean? That's a problem, because if you're looking at it, so by the end of this, I will tell you, okay, people stick with it. I'll make sure, I know that we've got it in our employment agreements.
I'll put a note down. I'll put it in a...
Yeah, I will make sure that I have a really clear...
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we have one more question? How do we... What's a justifiable reason to dismiss someone? Do you have like a list of what it could mean?
No, there's really easy ones, right? Okay, dismissal. There's two types. There is one for ongoing matters after warnings. So let's have an example. People just keep being late to work, right? It's your standard one, right? We say, look, you've been late, we're giving you verbal. You're late, we're giving you a written, you're late again, no, you're gone. So they are things that you can dismiss somebody for just misconduct that repeats itself, okay? You know, the gate, leaving the gates open. I only do that because I was off a stud farm. So it was, you know, catastrophic. My father used to roar, you know, you'd never leave a gate open, but okay. Or there is serious misconduct, which depend, like, they hit somebody in the workplace, although, you know, or with the milk, as I always say, it's funny, you know, they put penicillin in the milk or something. Let's say that you come across and you can see your stock being mistreated. I always think people think, I think that's one. If you come across and there's a ewe on the ground and you've got somebody kicking her in the head or something, to me, that would be grounds for instant dismissal. Do you know what I mean? So it's really how bad it is. And as long as you do the right process, it's okay. I could do a whole other thing on process. Process.
Yeah. Okay, leading from that question, what if, or who's liable if, you know, health and safety or the environment, we've got all these compliances now. So if you've had a staff member that doesn't wear a helmet and you've told them to, and then something happens, or an accident happens, or say winter grazing, you've told your employee what the plan is. How do you process that? Okay,
are we looking at, two things. There's two things. You've got to make sure, I'll put my prosecutor's hat on because I'm a prosecutor in another word, okay. There is no point having something up on the wall that says wear your helmet if you don't follow through with it. So I'm imagining how somebody comes in to prosecute you because somebody falls off and hits their bloody head, okay? So make sure not only do you have a policy, but you say to people, do this, put your helmet on, okay? So as long as you are taking steps and reasonable steps. Now, it's a bit more difficult with environmental matters, okay? You can get, you know, but that's the first thing. Keep on it, people. Secondly, I'd fire people. I believe that, let's say you tell somebody to wear a helmet, I said, nah, I'm not going to. In my view, that's enough to fire somebody. You can say, I'm telling you now, you put your helmet on. If you don't wear a helmet, that's fine, but you will be dismissed. Do you see what I'm saying? So you've really got to show as an employer that you've just not got policies, okay, but you are following up those policies. Okay, can I go back to our accommodation?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
This is a clause that I've got in our agreement. And again, this is why it's important to have clauses. Where the employee elects to use the provisions of the Parental Leave and Employment Protection Act and is off or will be off work for a period greater than 6 weeks, which makes sense. So you're giving them 6 weeks. The employer retains a right to require the employee to vacate the accommodation. So what I'm saying is, that's again, go back to your contract. I see in this, I don't know why I say six weeks. What I'll still do is I'll give you some background on the law on this, Megan. Do you know what I mean? But certainly that's what we've got in our employment agreement. 6 weeks, which I think is reasonable. Do you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't want to say as soon as you're off on maternity leave, you can get out of your house. Because that would be, yeah, and you'd never keep people. But I'll follow up on that, Megan, and give you some more background if that helps. Yep.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Hey, just in the interest of time, thank you so much, Mary Jane. And that was very insightful with all the questions. Keep those questions coming in.